Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second Insight series with Master. Today, I'm glad to share that we have with us Professor Jagannath Ambagudia. He is the current Deputy Director of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in the Guwahati campus. And he'll be talking to us about the topic on uh, democratic, sorry, uh, about unpacking tribal politics in India. I've known him for over a decade now, and his engaged research with the idea of politics and democracy in India is a substantive departure from the larger body of scholarly work that has often been um, you know often been sort of dealt with in the study of tribes. So because for the most part, if we when most people study tribes, it is to do either with the social part or the cultural part. Much of the political part is often left out. So I think this lecture is a sort of a gap filler in that sense of that lacuna. So I'll give a brief introduction. I'll read out the abstract of the talk, following which we'll have the introduction of the speaker and his um, felicitation. So the name of the talk is Democratic Dominance and Marginalized Communities, Unpacking Tribal Politics in India. Societies marked by differences often adopt representation in politics. Group representation focuses on the changing relationship between communities and political representation within the broader liberal democratic framework. Against this backdrop, tribal communities in India were introduced as a distinct category in the political system due to their historical injustices and exclusion from former political institutions. Um, the post-colonial Indian state enacted institutional mechanisms in the form of electoral reservation to ensure their representation in democratic politics. Political reservation was extended to tribal communities to address discrimination emerging out of their exclusion from formal political institutions and to accommodate differences within the political sphere. Meanwhile, following the democratic dominance framework, the political outcome of group representation concerning tribal communities is often debatable. However, numerous changes have taken place in terms of the political engagement of tribal communities in the last 75 years, beginning from active involvement in politics to influencing public policy, as well as occupying the highest constitutional positions, such as the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, governors of state, and the President of the Republic of India. This lecture presents a trajectory and overview of tribal politics while keeping in mind the changing relationship between tribal communities and democracy. It explores the patterns, conditions, and challenges of tribes' participation in electoral politics and presents the issues and agendas that will continue to affect tribal politics in the future. I now invite my student Tong to give a brief introduction to the speaker.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Participants from both online and offline, we welcome you. The second Insight Series lecture of this semester, hosted by the Humanities and Social Science IIT Gandhinagar. This Insight Series lecture began in 2022 by Professor Ashish Khakha with a focus on development of indigenous people issues. And previous luminaries who have graced the lecture include Professor P. Sainath, Professor Rashid Khaledi, Professor Muhammad Mamdani, Professor Edgar Nauswanu, and various esteemed speakers. And today we are very fortunate to have with us Professor Jagannath Ambagudia. Professor Jagannath Ambagudia is a Deputy Director of Tata Institute of Social Science, Guwahati. and a professor at Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, School of Social Science and Humanities, TIS Guwahati campus. He was also a dean of the School of Social Science and Humanities and the chairperson for Unit for Research and Development in TIS Guwahati. Previously, he taught at the University of Delhi, the National Law School of India University in Bangalore, and he is trained in political science in Jawaharlal University, JNU. He specialized in Indian politics, focusing on politics and social justice. His research primarily investigates the different dynamics of Adivasis, indigenous societies, especially Adivasis politics, everyday experience and inclusive policies of the state, development and deprivation, social discrimination and marginalization, preferential treatment, distributive justice, and Adivasi relationship with other communities in the context of resource utilization in India. Through his research, it essentially focused on Adivasis issues, and he is also interested in migration studies, policy studies, democracy, and development. Professor Ambagudia current research evolved around the evolving relationship between scheduled tribes and democracy in India, particularly analyzing the role of tribal politics representative at the decision-making level within the state and at the national domains. His writings are published in Economic and Politically Weekly, ASEAN Social Work and Policy Review, Journal of ASEAN and African Studies, Social Change, Studies in Indian Politics, International Review of Social Research, Conflict Studies Quarterly, Journal of Social Inclusion, Inclusion Studies, and National Law School of Indian Review. Among other, he is the author of Adivasis, Migrant and the State in India, published by Rowlett in 2019, and also the co-editor with Professor Virginis Khakha of the highly acclaimed The Sage Handbook of Tribal Politics in India, published in 2021. He is a lifetime member of International Political Science Association and also the board member of the International Political Science Association Research Committee on Political Elites. So with this brief introduction, please join me in welcoming him to IIT Gandhinagar. So with this, we would like to appreciate him with a token of small appreciation.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Ashish and other organizing members for this opportunity. This visit is unique for me for two reasons. One is that I'm going to share some of the issues that I have been working for quite some time, and I anticipate some kind of critical feedback so that I can revisit my, quote unquote, established notion of looking at tribal politics in India. The second unique is, of course, personal. That is, for the first time, this is my first visit in the state of Gujarat. So I feel privileged to visit the state of Gujarat. When I got the invitation, then I was told that it may be good to begin the discussion on the book that I and Professor Virginis Khaka edited. It's called Handbook of Tribal Politics in India. And unfortunately, the SAYS India book project has also been closed down. So the book is no longer available on print, but you can still access this soft copy of the book online. This talk, the basis of this talk is that Handbook of Tribal Politics in India, but not exclusively based on that book, but we'll also be flagging of some of the issues which probably goes beyond the issue that we have raised in that book. And I hope that will help us to have meaningful discussions further. As the title of my presentation suggests, it's called Democratic Dominance and Marginalized Communities, Unpacking Tribal Politics in India. What I intend to do in this talk is I'll quickly take all of you to the overall notion of tribal politics, or I'll give you the quick overview of tribal politics in India, and also perhaps raise certain kind of critical issues. And when I'm going to raise certain issues at the end of this, I may not be having answer to all those issues, but I'll leave these issues to all of you to, introspect, engage in at different levels. If we look at the title itself, democratic dominance and marginalized communities, then at the beginning that I'd like to make the point that I'm going to, prove in the course of next 45 minutes or so is that we did adopt the democratic system of the government, which is based on equality, extending equal opportunity to each and every individual, irrespective of social identities. But when it comes to explore the relationship between democracy and marginalized communities, then there is enough provisions in the adopted democratic system where dominance can be established over the marginalized communities. In other words, in the established democratic system in India, there are multiple
I am
provisions,
there in the meeting
multiple
for the
scope
battle.
for establishing dominance over the marginalized communities in India, more specifically in the context of tribal communities in India. As my talk begins, then I usually begin with the nature of Indian society, which is seen as the complete grid of caste, color, gender, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. If we look at that kind of differences, that kind of diversities in Indian society, then there was a need to recognize as well as accommodate such kind of differences of Indian society. So in order to recognize such kind of differences, then we did structure our democratic system in such a way which will include all sections of the society, irrespective of their social identities, irrespective of their culture, practices, and so on and so forth. So as a part of our inclusive framework, then we did develop democratic system with the provision of recognizing their differences, as well as the outcome of this recognition is accommodating their differences in a democratic system. So when we adopted the notion of accommodating them in the larger political framework, then two issues emerged. That is, one in terms of equal citizenship, the other one was in terms of differential citizenship, or sometimes what we call as the adequate citizenship. So the larger framework as the liberal democratic system that we adopted is largely based on equal citizenship. But when it comes to the marginalized section of the society, like the tribal communities, then it was realized that equal citizenship is insufficient to address the requirements of marginalized communities. So in the place of equal citizenship, we did talk about the need for differential citizenship. Differential citizenship is nothing but providing the necessary requirements as for their requirement, not on the basis of larger framework of equality and so on and so forth. As this talk is largely based on politics, then this democratic, the differential citizenship was materialized through the enactment of what we call as quota system, or we call as preferential considerations, or political or political reservation. If we look at the political reservation issues, then I'll be focusing on that in a minute or so. But what I usually mean by democratic dominance, that's the framework that I propose to use, is that despite having equal provisions, preferential considerations, and so on and so forth, then the dominant section of the society finds multiple ways of establishing their dominance over the tribal communities in India. That is what I usually mean by democratic dominance. And in the context of India, I'll try to prove that what are the basic provisions, or what we are considering as the systemic issues that essentially give aids or advantage to the dominant section of the society over the tribal communities when it comes to their performance in politics. As far as this talk is concerned, then I have also I usually try to focus on the nature of tribal politics during the pre-independence period, largely during the colonial period. And the nature and dynamics of tribal politics during the colonial period essentially begins with the nature of tribal society itself. And if we look at the nature of tribal society, then the tribal communities had their own history of governance, self-governance, autonomy, as well as tribal life world. And in addition to that, tribal communities had developed their own conception of democracy, which was based on communitarianism as well as equal democratic values. But like other parts of India, then the tribal areas were also, not an exception to be occupied or invaded by the colonial forces, the British. So if we look at the British approach towards the tribal communities, then British or the colonial forces authoritatively integrated the tribal communities into the dominant political, into the dominant political system. So this was the first indication of exposing the tribal communities to the dominant political system. However, if we look at the overall concerns of the representation of Indian communities in the British, political system or their approach towards India, then that system was largely based on quote unquote exclusionary vision or exclusion criteria. So they did demand that there should be representation of Indians in the decision-making process. Consequently, the British introduced the group representation under the parliamentary reforms of 1909. However, the nature of representation was essentially being dictated by the colonial forces. That is, sometimes the nature of Indians' representation was based on election and largely governed by their nomination. And this was also applicable to the tribal communities of India. And if we look at their approach, then it was not based on any kind of election. Rather, it was based on nomination, and why they were following the nomination process. I'll be talking about that in a minute or so. If we look at the formal introduction of tribal communities to electoral politics, then along with other Indians, the tribal communities of India were for the first time introduced to the electoral politics under the Government of India Act 1935. And this Act, 1935 Act, had the provision of reservation of seats under the fifth schedule of 1935 Act for the tribal communities. And if you see the table, then this reflects the statistical representation of tribal communities in the colonial political system. What is significant, or the inferences that we can draw from this table is that there was no reservation in the Provincial Legislative Council, that is the upper house of the Indian federal structure. However, the tribal communities were given reservation in the Federal Legislative Assembly. As a result, 1.52, 24 seats out of 1,585 seats were reserved for the tribal communities, which essentially comes around 1.52%. But what is interesting over here is that if you look at the contemporary practice of reservation policy, then that is essentially based on the notion of proportionality. If we apply the similar kind of principle and try to understand the nature of representation of tribal communities during the colonial system, then it doesn't seem to be based on the notion of proportionality, because if we look at the 1931 census, then the tribal population of India was around 2.45%. However, the representation to the decision-making bodies was only 1.52%. So what does this indicate? This indicates that there was a disproportionate representation of tribal communities in the decision-making bodies during the colonial period. Along with that, let's move to the next stage or the next phase of tribal politics. Sometimes people do consider this as the tribal politics during the transitional phase, especially considering or spanning from 1946. That is the year where we, set up the Constituent Assembly to frame the constitution for the independent India till the enactment of the Indian Constitution, that is till 1949, which came into effect in 1950. If we look at tribal politics during the what we could in a narrow sense transitional phase, then that began with the nature of representation in the Constituent Assembly, where six tribal members were represented in the Constituent Assembly. And if we look at the major concern, without going into details about the debates on the debates in the Constituent Assembly, then the Constituent Assembly largely debated that what should be the place of tribal communities in the post-colonial India. And at the end of the long-term debate from 1946 to 1949, then it was decided that tribal communities should get special considerations when it comes to their representation in the post-colonial India. So that was the basis of understanding tribal politics in the post-colonial period. However, what is significant about tribal politics in the post-colonial period is that it began with the negotiation with the state. In a sense, that Indian state entered into negotiation with the tribal communities to accelerate the process of nation building, to develop a composite nation, to develop a unified nation, because during that time, India was facing enough challenges to accelerate the process of nation building and so on and so forth. So the part of taking all these communities together and accelerate the process of nation building, then Indian state, develop the sense that the tribal communities shall also get, along with scheduled caste, they should also get preferential consideration so that they can be integrated into the mainstream society. And please remember that before independence, before independence, then tribal communities were to a large extent maintaining their isolated position, or what we call that the British had also followed the policy of isolation in order to protect the tribal communities from the sense of exploitation by the dominant section of the society. So the outcome of this negotiation was the political reservation that was adopted in the Constituent Assembly. And as far the political reservation was concerned, then when it was decided that there should be given political considerations or political preference, then that preference was materialized through defining certain constituencies as the reserved, as the reserved constituency, which were the major concerns for the post-colonial period. Declaring certain constituency as a reserved constituency was one of the major concerns of the post-colonial Indian state. Then Indian state adopted a particular methodology through which the constituencies were earmarked as reserved for the scheduled tribe communities. So basically, we follow 4 different kind of formula when it comes to understanding tribal politics, both at the national level as well as at the state level. When it comes to how many seats shall be reserved for the tribal communities, then we follow the first formula, that is the entitlement of ST seats in Lok Sabha. Please do remember that Rajya Sabha doesn't have any kind of any provision for reservation. So first we fix the total number of ST seats in the Lok Sabha, and the total number of seats in Lok Sabha are being reserved by following the formula called the total tribal population of the country divided by total population of this country into the total elected seats in the Lok Sabha. That is at the moment 543. Once the number of seats are determined, then the next concern for us is how to distribute these seats among the states. So when we follow the first principle, then we will arrive at the fact that 47 seats shall be reserved for the tribal communities. Then the next concern was how to distribute this 47 ST Lok Sabha seats to different states. Then we follow the second principle, that is total tribal population of the state divided by total tribal population of the country into the total ST seats of Lok Sabha. More or less the similar principle is formula are also being followed at the state level. That is first determining how many seats shall be reserved for the ST in the state legislative assembly. That is total tribal population of the state divided by total population of the state into total seats of the assembly. Then the other concern was how to distribute the ST assembly seats to different districts of the state. Then we do follow the formula like total tribal population of the district divided by total tribal population of the state into the total ST seats of the assembly. Before I come to the next slide, then in the post-colonial period, then we had also followed the single slash double member constituencies when it came to the reserve seats. In a sense that the constituencies which were having more than 50% of the tribal population were declared as the ST reserve constituency, and the substantial number of tribal population, but not more than 50%. That constituency was having the experiences of double member constituency, where two candidates were elected, two candidates were allowed to contest the election. However, during that time, we were following the system called distributive vote system or block vote system. And the distributive vote system or block vote system is a system where two votes cannot be cast in favor of a particular candidate. So two votes, each individual was allowed to cast two votes, but two votes cannot be cast to the single candidate. So the two votes shall be distributed among two candidates. But the challenge during that time was that when it came to calculation who is the winning candidate, then first from this double member constituency, the tribal candidate was declared as winning candidate, and rest of the tribal candidates were also eligible to contest for the next seats, that is the general seat especially. So during that time, there were some instances in the first two general elections, especially 1952 as well as 1957 general election, that more tribal candidates were elected in the first two general election than the total number of seats reserved for them. This was seen by the Election Commission of India not positively. And this was seen by the Election Commission of India as the threat to the political representation of non-tribal communities. Hence, the parliament introduced the abolition of dual member constituency in 1961. Now we practice the single member constituency. Is the outcome of this larger debates about the place of tribal communities in politics has been emerged in the form of different constitutional provisions. And we have two significant provisions or articles that essentially deal with political representation of tribal communities. That is Article 330, which deals with reservation of seats for the tribals as well as SCs in Lok Sabha. And the other article is 332, that is essentially focusing on reservation of seats at the legislative assemblies. But however, interestingly, there is no political reservation in the Rajya Sabha as well as upper houses of the state legislature, that is legislative council. The reason is that both these houses were created for different purposes. For instance, if you look at the Rajya Sabha, then Rajya Sabha was created to maintain balance between center and the state, that is the federal character of Indian state. So as the members of Rajya Sabha are elected by the state legislatures and not directly elected by the people, hence Rajya Sabha doesn't have the provision of reservation of seats for the SCs as well as STs. Similarly, unlike the Legislative Assembly, that is the lower house of the state legislature, we don't have reserved seats in the Legislative Council, that is the upper house of the state legislature. And similarly, the members of the legislative councils are also not directly elected by the people, and they are elected by the MPs, then municipality bodies, graduates, teachers, and so on and so forth. So as their members are not directly elected by the common people, hence the scope of a reservation, political reservation, was not extended to the upper houses of the national legislature as well as the state legislature. But interestingly, when we look at the political reservation, then it was adopted as an ad hoc position or in ad hoc manner. That is, it was initially meant for 10 years. The rationality for adopting 10 years is that will help us to implement the political considerations more effectively, and it becomes easy for us to evaluate or assess the impact of political reservation. However, in the present context, no political party dares to take away the provision of reservation, because at the end of the day, it has reduced merely to vote bank politics. But one interesting aspect is that politics was the only sphere which has the time limit of 10 years. You don't have the time limit prescribed for reservation in education as well as reservation in government employment. But politics is the only sphere which comes under the timeline of 10 years. And one of the significant reasons why this kind of limitation was put to political reservation was that once the political reservation ceases to exist, then there will be no, representation from the marginalized communities, and they can easily bring the amendment to Article 330 and 332 to, take away the provision of reservation. However, over the period, we have also developed the institutional mechanism to adjust in terms of reallocating the existing seats, because since 1976, the parliament has frozen the overall, concerns or the number of seats, and which is now extended till 2026. Before that, there will be no revisit about the reallocation of number of seats, though various political parties do talk about the need for doubling the total number of Lok Sabha members and so on and so forth. But before 2026, it's not going to happen because the freeze has been extended till 2026. However, some of the internal mechanisms or internal arrangements have already been introduced to take care of the proportionality of reserve seats. And one such mechanism or exercise was done in 2008 when the parliament introduced the delimitation of parliament and assembly constituencies order 2008, which has essentially increased the number of representation of tribal communities in Lok Sabha from 41 to 47, and at the state level from 532 to 554. So at the moment we have, 47 Lok Sabha seats and 554 assembly seats reserved for the tribal communities. And this map essentially indicates the location of 47 seats of Lok Sabha that are designed or earmarked as the ST reserve constituency. If you look at this map, then this map provides the comparative location of ST reserve constituency as well as SC reserve constituency. The dark green essentially indicate the seats that are reserved for the SCs, and the light green essentially indicates the seats reserved for the tribal communities. Why I have drawn this map is that this has interesting, picture, in a sense that because when we look at the demarcation of reserve constituency, then we have the larger framework that based on the population strength, the seats are being reserved. But when it comes to scheduled caste seats reserved for the scheduled caste population, then one interesting aspect, it has been spread over different parts of the country, unlike the tribal constituencies. Tribal constituencies are pocketed or located in certain pockets. But on the other hand, if you look at the SC reserve constituencies, then they are spread over different parts of the country. And here, whatever the formula that we adopted or we apply for the tribal communities, that can also be applied. In addition to that, it has also been, the discretionary power is also being given to the Delimitation Commission to ensure that the seats are spread over different parts of the country. And that has, invited strong criticism against the Delimitation Commission, because there are certain constituencies located in the state of Bihar with heavy SC population are not being sometimes declared as SC reserve constituency. Then in other states, the constituency with less population, SC population, are also being declared as SC reserve constituency. That's the intention of bringing the issues of the comparative map. The other issue that I'd like to discuss maybe in the next few minutes is the changing relationship between political parties and tribal communities, more specifically in terms of their performance in different elections. But what is interesting over here is that when we look at the relationship between political parties and tribal communities, then that begins with the national movement period. And the Congress party was at the forefront to mobilize different communities in India, and the tribal communities were not an exception. For the first time, the Congress party realized that the tribal issues shall be reflected in the election manifesto in its 1946 election manifesto. However, based on this figure, I'll draw some kind of conclusion. But before I go to that if you look at the changing relationship between Congress party as well as tribal communities, then that relationship is being explored into two different aspects. That is, one is politics of accommodation, then politics of appropriation, as well as the politics of repression. when we look at the politics of accommodation, then because of the practice of political reservation, the political parties did not have any other option but to give tickets or include the tribal communities, because in reserve constituencies, only tribal candidates can contest election and non-tribals are not allowed to do that. So that has been possible because of political reservation, which has been considered as the politics of accommodation. However, at certain point of time, Congress also explored that there are certain vocal tribal political leaders like Jaipal Singh, then they try to appropriate such kind of vocal tribal political leaders. And sometimes the Jharkhand party that was formed, then they also realized that they wanted to address the tribal issues being part of the mainstream political party, that is the Congress party. Because of such approach, then there was a merge of Congress party and the Jharkhand party in 1963. And the third kind of relationship was largely directed towards the tribal communities of Northeast India. That is in 1980s, when there was a movement for moving away from Indian Union, then the Indian state adopted the martial approach to suppress that kind of, that kind of movement. But what is interesting from this table is that initially the ST reserve constituencies were essentially being captured by the Congress party. And Congress party is essentially known as the catch-all party or inclusive kind of party as far as the marginalized communities are concerned. And please do remember that for the first time, Congress has introduced tribal issues in its election manifesto in 1946, even prior to the attainment of independence. So the tribal communities were extending support to Congress party based on their role in national movement led by Mahatma Gandhi, and also the kind of approach that it adopted to address the tribal issues. But gradually what is happening is that Congress party has lost its social base as far as the tribal communities are concerned. And this social base has shifted to the ideologically driven kind of political party like the BJP. For instance, the BJP for the first time owned 6 tribal seats in 1989. And if you look at the latest data, that is 2019 election, then it has been able to capture 31 out of 47 ST seats. 31 is not a small number when it comes to compared with the total of 47 seats. So gradually the social support base of the tribal communities has shifted from what we considered as catch-all party of Congress to the BJP. But the success of BJP in ST reserve constituency, the credit for such success cannot be entirely given to the Bharatiya Janata Party. And there are certain ideologically synchronized right-wing political organizations which are essentially working in tribal areas, and such kind of initiatives of the organizations like Banbasi Kalyan Ashram, Friends of Tribal Society, Vivekanand Kendra, and so on and so forth, then the persistent efforts of such ideologically driven political organizations have essentially helped the BJP to capture more seats in the tribal dominated areas than the dominated areas than the Congress party and other thing. And the other generalization that we tend to make is that the major support base of left parties, such as the Communist Party of India, Marxists, and so on and so forth, are the marginalized communities, such as the tribal communities. And largely, this kind of generalization has been made by exploring the relationship between the tribal communities and insurgent groups like the Naxalites. But what is happening over here is that even the government of India formed committee has acknowledged that the Naxalites' major support base is the tribal communities as well as the Dalit communities. But when it comes to the politics, then whatever the nature of support that the tribal communities have towards these insurgent groups, that has not been reflected to extend to the probably the political party, which are largely synchronizing with their larger political ideology. So if we look at this table, then the success rate of the left parties as well as independent candidates is marginal in comparison to other national political parties like BJP as well as the Congress party. The other section of my presentation is because this is where we probably get the sense whether there is any form of democratic dominance that I have promised to use at the beginning of my talk. that is, in terms of exploring the relationship between tribal political representatives and the way they address the issues and concerns of the tribal communities, largely in terms of whether their representation in the political institutions or decision-making bodies has reflected or translated into the outcome of public policy. As tribal communities have their own unique identities, own concerns, and so on, and so on, and so on, so forth, then tribal communities are being mobilized through their respective social identities, through their respective ethnic identities, in the sense that different political parties as well as tribal political representatives make series of promises before the tribal communities that if they are elected to the decision-making bodies, then they will address the issues and concerns of tribal communities. Uh, However, when it comes to the issues and concerns of performance of tribal political representatives, and this is also applicable to the tribal MLAs at the state level, two positions or two viewpoints have emerged. One is the positive aspect, the other one is the negative, in the sense that there's also the perception that the tribal political representatives have not been able to address the issues and concerns of their respective tribal communities. Let me get into the positive dimensions of positive impact first, then I go to the next one. That if we look at this positive impact of the political representatives of tribal communities in the decision-making bodies, then it has been pointed out that the extension of political reservation to the tribal communities has essentially helped them to address the issues and concerns of the tribal communities, more specifically in terms of distribution and redistribution of public goods, benefits, welfare policies, programs, and policies, programs, and so on and so forth. And some of the recent developments, such as the bifurcation of National Commission for Scheduled Tribes from the National Commission for Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes, is the outcome of the presence of tribal political representatives. The carving out of Ministry of Tribal Affairs from the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment is also the indication of the presence of tribal political representatives in the decision-making bodies. Then the enactment of two most progressive legislation that we ever had in the political history of India, such as the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act, which is commonly known as Forest Rights Act 2006, as well as the enactment of Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, that is the PESA, in 1996. These are the two most progressive legislation that we ever had in our parliamentary history. And this has been possible because of the presence of the tribal political representatives. And if you see the PESA as well as FRA, then through this legislation essentially work towards reallocating, rearranging the existing power structure between the dominant communities as well as the marginalized communities. So if we look at that aspect, then there are some kind of positive impact of the presence of tribal political representatives in the decision-making bodies. However, interesting aspect is parliamentary democracy functions on the basis of the politics of number. So when it comes to politics of number, only 47 tribal MPs are there. And even the 47 tribal MPs are there, then they do not, act in cohort or together. So in that context, it becomes extremely challenging for them to have any meaningful impact. But however, the representation of tribal communities in the decision-making bodies essentially puts psychological pressure on the on the government. So consequently, the government does not underrate the values of the presence of tribal political representatives. And in front of us, there was an example also in 1999 when the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government was put on the confidence motion on April 17, 1999. Then the Vajpayee government could not prove its majority and lost its confidence motion by single vote. And the single vote was cast by the tribal MP from Odisha, South Odisha, because during that time in 1999, Odisha has experienced super cyclone, and the Congress chief minister, Hemananda Biswal, during that time was not able to handle. Then Giridhar Gamang was sent back to the state of Odisha and given the responsibility of chief minister. And he was yet to resign from his Lok Sabha membership. because under Article 164 of the Indian Constitution, there is a provision that even if you are not elected, then you can become a minister of either of the house. So under that category, he was the chief minister of Odisha, but he was yet to resign from parliament. So when the confidence motion was introduced in the parliament, he was called by the Congress party and cast vote against the confidence motion. So it was believed that it was the tribal vote that brought down the elected government. So government does not underrate the value of the tribal political representative. The other side of the story is that though political reservation has significant political positive impact over the tribal communities, but it has a long way to go in addressing the issues in actuality. And for instance, uh, tribal communities share a little more than 8% of the total population of the country. But if you look at their share in the total displacement area, then they constitute more than 40% of that population. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest over here is no doubt that because of the practice of democratic system in India, we did adopt some positive provisions, but these positive provisions have a long way to go in addressing the problems and concerns of the tribal communities. And there are different reasons for that. For instance, they do not act in cohort. Even the voters do not support a particular political party. The voters are also being distributed across different political parties, across different ideological positions, and so on and so forth. So for those indications essentially suggest that, they are being distributed across party lines. And for that reason, they do not matter much in electoral in electoral politics. And I had a chance to talk number of tribal MPs as a part of one of the significant projects. And the tribal MPs across party line, they do not come together even it comes to address the tribal issues. Only time they come together, there is a forum in the parliament called SC and ST forum. And that is the only forum where all of them meet together. And even if they meet together, then they don't agree with each other because of their party affiliation, ideological differences, and so on and so forth. Only one issue that brings all these SC, ST, MP together across party line is the extension of reservation for the next 10 years, because this is being periodically extended 10 years at a time. And that is the only issue where they usually come together and put pressure on the government to extend further. However, the crux of the second side of the story is that the tribal communities continue to experience the sense of marginalization, discrimination, deprivation, as well as dispossession when it comes to natural resources and so on and so forth. The last part of my talk is about the contemporary issues, and here probably I'll provoke some of you to rethink about it and raise certain kind of concerns. That the first point that I essentially focus is that because if you look at political reservation or reservation as a whole, then the philosophy of enacting reservation is that they will speak for the tribal, they will speak on behalf of the tribal communities. But if that is the case, why the tribal communities continue to languish in terms of marginalization, deprivation, dispossession, and so on and so forth? So this brings me to raise certain questions, like whose interest the tribal political representatives represent in the parliament. And this is where I usually focus on the sense of democratic dominance. No doubt, the idea and philosophy of reservation policy is to represent the interest of their own communities based on reserved seats and so on and so forth. But the way Indian parliament works, then it gives enough scope, it gives much more emphasis to political party. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest over here is that once the tribal political representatives are elected in the decision-making bodies, then they do not follow the needs and expectations of their own constituencies, largely the tribal communities. What they follow is the party whips, party dictates, because there is something called in parliamentary system, in Indian parliamentary system, there is something called anti-defection. So once they are elected, then they follow the party line, not the needs and expectations of the tribal communities. In this context also, I had raised one question to the one of the tribal MPs, that what do you think, whose interest the tribal political representatives represent, his response was very interesting, that the party never works against the tribals. So whatever the thing the party represents is the interest of the tribal community, which is far from tenable, because if you look at the kind of experience tribal communities are going through at this point of time. So what is significant over here is that once the tribal representatives are elected to the decision-making bodies, it seems to be remote to argue that they represent the interests of the tribal communities. Rather, they represent the party interest in the decision-making bodies. So I'll suggest some of you to at least listen the first few lines. If someone stands up or one of the MPs stands up and start speaking, they will not say that I'm here to represent the interest of the tribal community. The first line, they will say that I stand to support this issue on behalf of my party, or on behalf of my party, I support or I oppose the issue. That is the first sentence they say. So it's very interesting. The debates are available on YouTube, and anyone can check that one. So if you go with that one, the way the parliamentary democracy works in India, then it gives very little scope or no scope to represent the interest of the tribal communities. The second issue is is the patterns of tribal representation in Rajya Sabha. If you look at the nature of representation, you do find very, hardly any tribal representatives in the, Rajya Sabha, because they're not elected directly by the people. They're elected by the state legislature. And when it comes to elected by the state legislature, it is the party which nominate the candidates for the Rajya Sabha. And political parties, whichever the political party you take as an example, except some of the ethnically driven political parties formed by the tribal community, I'm referring here the national political parties like BJP, Congress, left parties, Sarad Pawar's party, and so on and so forth. They hardly nominate any candidate from the tribal communities when it comes to Rajya Sabha. So even in the Rajya Sabha, it is the party interest that matters a lot rather than the interest of the marginalized communities. Now, the third issue, I'll take 10 more minutes if it is okay. The third issue is the gender politics. These days, we do talk about the women political empowerment and so on and so forth. But gender issues of tribal society has largely, has very little kind of, very little significance has been given to the, gender issues when it comes to tribal communities. That is, tribal women are least preferred by the political parties, even if it comes to nominating to the reserved constituencies. However, some of the positive developments have taken place in the recent past, that is especially in 2019 elections. And some of the regional political parties like BJD, Biju Janata Dal of Odisha, Trinamool Congress of West Bengal, they have taken the decision that at least 33% of the party tickets shall be given to the women candidates. But they also have a strategy. It's very interesting. That is, when it comes to giving 33% party tickets to the women, what they usually do is they give these tickets to the tribal women, not as a larger kind of thing. And interestingly, as a result, you can find the youngest MP of India from Odisha, the tribal woman who is being elected in 2019. But interestingly, what they usually do is that when it comes to giving ticket to the women, more specifically the tribal women, then the wife of sitting MPs or the sister of the sitting MPs are usually given tickets as far as the party ticket distribution are concerned. So some people do argue that because in 2019 election, then more than 15% representation is there as far as the women category is concerned. And this has been possible because of giving party ticket to the tribal women. So some people do argue that the women representation in Indian Parliament has been possible at the cost of ST men as well as SC men, because the tickets are being given in reserved constituencies to women rather than unreserved, constituencies. Then the fourth issue is significant, interesting developments have taken place in the recent past. That is if you observe the election processes very closely, different political parties are entering into alliances with tribal political parties. In 2021 state election of Assam, then there was something called, people have also used this term called rainbow coalition. That is more specifically in relation to the coalition between BJP, which entered in alliance with the Borderland People's Front, as well as other tribal political parties in Assam. So the political parties are entering into alliances with tribal political parties at a different level. Same is the case in the case of Jharkhand, when Congress entered alliances with Jharkhand Mukti Morcha as well. Then the other thing that is also happening in tribal politics is that the tribal candidates are also getting nominated from unreserved constituencies. If you see the 2019 election, then more than 100 candidates, tribal candidates, were contested from unreserved constituency across India. And 6 of them were also elected in 2019 general election from unreserved constituency. And that is, in fact, that the individual initiative that the tribal candidates have taken. But at the party level also, BJP has nominated tribal candidates from unreserved constituency. Congress has nominated tribal candidates from unreserved constituency during the 2009 as well as 2014 general election. For instance, if you slightly go back to the Northeast India, then Arunachal has 2 Lok Sabha seats, Arunachal East as well as Arunachal West, and both of these seats are unreserved. But every time I had a look of the data from 2009 onwards, both Congress as well as BJP give party ticket to the tribal candidate. How do we understand that? Even in 2014 election, then Sarbanand Sonowal, who was the Chief Minister of Assam, was also nominated from unreserved constituency of Lakhimpur. But these 2 issues have 2 significant differences. In the case of Arunachal Pradesh, 59 assembly seats out of 60 are reserved for tribal community. That means there's a high concentration of tribal population in Arunachal Pradesh. So that means wherever there are heavy concentration of tribal population, irrespective of reserve or unreserved constituencies, political parties are nominating the tribal candidates from those unreserved constituency. But in the case of Sarbanand Sonowal, the reason was slightly different, in a sense that he emerged from the grassroots because he was also the president of All Assam Student Union, which experienced Assam movement from 1979 to 1985. So he had wider social base. For that reason, he was nominated from unreserved parliamentary constituency. The other issue that has been happening now is that gradually tribal communities are also moving away from ethnic political parties. Here, ethnic political parties is the tribal political parties formed by the tribal communities. And that has been happening in the case of Northeast as well. And Northeast is the significant examples where you see the mushrooming of tribal political, parties, in addition to Jharkhand Mukti Morcha. And recently, in the case of Gujarat as well as Rajasthan as well, where the emergence of Bharatiya Tribal Party, that has the presence in the state of Gujarat. In 2017 assembly election, it has won 2 seats. Even in Rajasthan, it has also on 2, assembly seats. So these are the emergence of new tribal political parties, but the tribal communities are moving away from ethnically based political parties like Mizo National Front, Naga National Front. Even in Tripura, where you do find heavy concentration of tribal population, the CPI, ruled for the last 25 years. So how do we understand this dynamic? This can be understood by the fact that the tribal political parties were given the opportunity to govern the state. However, based on their, experiences, which doesn't seem to be much impressive, now they have also started moving to different national, political parties as well. The other one is that difference between tribal politics in Central India as well as Northeast India. And why I have put this point is that in terms of their participation, if you look at the participation of tribal MPs in the parliament, debates, deliberations, then the participation of tribal MPs from Northeast India is much more relatively more impressive than the participation of tribal MPs from Central India. And there are a lot of other reasons why that is happening. One way of understanding that dynamics is because of the introduction of Christian missionaries, which help them to get exposed to the public sphere in terms of the cultural capital, that is English language, and so on and so forth, which help them to participate in the political debates and so on and so forth. Then if you look at the nature of tribal movement and so on and so forth, you do find number of powerful tribal political leaders. However, they have not been able to contest successfully in the parliamentary elections as well as in assembly elections. And how do we understand that? And yesterday also I had been to meet the founder of Bharatiya Tribal Party, and I did ask this question that, you have been working in this area. They work on the border of Gujarat as well as Maharashtra. That is the wheel-dominated, area. And they formed the tribal political party called Bharatiya Tribal Party in 2017. When I asked him that, then the national political parties do not allow them to function in their own way. They do every possible effort to sabotage the force of the tribal movement. For that reason, they have not been able to come to power, both at the parliament level as well as assembly level. And more than that, the tribal political parties or tribal political leaders do not have the required resources to fight with the people, even from the reserve constituencies, because some of them do not get nominated. If you are too vocal, then the major political parties feel that they may appear to be threatening to their own leadership, so they don't nominate such kind of candidates. What they do is, because they don't have any option or any alternative, because of the reserve constituency, they nominate those candidates who will obediently follow their instructions and so on, so forth. They do that. Then in early 2000 or 2013 period, then there was also the re-emergence of alternative way of tribal politics. And that is more specifically in the case of Chhattisgarh, in the case of Jharkhand, when the then National Commissioner of the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes and Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes, B.D. Sharma, had initiated the Bharatiya Jan Andolan. Then they tried to provide alternative way of doing politics, in a sense that the candidates who were supposed to contest the election were collectively decided by the tribal communities before they were nominated for that. They did not win any election, but they provided steep competition to some of the political parties like the Congress party. So that kind of initiatives was also taken place. And there is a larger concerns for demanding autonomy for the tribal communities, that they should be allowed to lead in their own way and so on and so forth. And now there is also the emergence of tribal political party. The best example is Bharatiya Tribal Party. And more recently, they have also formed the political party called Bharatiya Adivasi Party, most in the state of, Rajasthan. But how do we understand this dynamics when there's a mushrooming of tribal political parties, or why there was a need for the formation of tribal political parties, is when the tribal political leaders are getting suffocated within the national political party, then they try to get out of such kind of suffocation, because the political parties do not treat them with equality, dignity. They do not give them equal opportunity to work for the tribal communities. So in that sense, the committed tribal leaders move away from national political parties or state political parties and form their own political party. And the issues of development, induced displacement is also dominating the overall aspect of tribal development, so as the issues of land alienation. When it comes to land alienation, even if you see the history of land possession, then tribal communities is one of the significant communities which still controls, or which still has the maximum amount of land resources. But what is happening is the quantum of the possession of land has gone down among the tribal communities. So the tribal communities among the large scale land holdings has decreased, and the land holding in the marginal section has increased substantially. So that essentially indicates that there's a gradual process of land alienation from the tribal communities to non-tribal communities. The other one is that if you see the nature of reservation, then we have been providing reservation to three spheres: education, politics, as well as the government employment. The original constitution did not have the provision of providing reservation to educational sector or in education. It provided only to politics as well as government employment. But it was realized that if they are not educated enough, if they are not capable enough, then they will not be able to perform their duties effectively. So the education to educational sector was extended by the first Constitutional Amendment Act 1951. But if you look at the nature of resistance, then the nature of resistance to reservation to education as well as government employment is much more significant than resistance to political reservation. If you see the involvement of judiciary also, you do find series of PIL filing against reservation in education as well as government employment. You don't find, or you hardly find anyone, at least I haven't seen filing, PIL against political reservation, both at the national as well as state level. And there are a lot of reasons why there is a disproportionate, resistance to political reservation. If anything comes up during the discussion, then I'll be happy to answer them. The last point that I'd like to point out is the recent development. That is, what does the 2022 presidential election mean for the tribal communities? Why that election is significant is that the tribal woman has occupied the highest constitutional position, that is Draupadi Murmu. If you see the implications of 2022 presidential election, then there are two significant aspects. One is positive one, then the other one is the that doesn't make any significant difference to the tribal communities. When she was nominated, or when there was an announcement by the BJP-led NDA that she will be nominated as the NDA candidate for the presidential election, then there was a celebration across the country. That means that created some kind of hope among the tribal communities that if their own member gets elected to the highest constitutional position, then that will be, then that will be helpful to address their, thing. And there are some positive indication as well that when the state of Jharkhand has introduced two, amendments to the existing land legislation, allowing the alienation of tribal land to the non-tribal for industrial purposes and so on and so forth. No doubt that was supported by the civil movement across the state as well as civil society organizations. But what she did is that, because during that time she was the governor of Jharkhand, she did not give her assent. Unless she, that gets assent from the governor, then that can't become an act at the state level. That is one positive indication. The other positive indication is, I'll suggest all of you to watch the YouTube video. That all the presidential speech and other things are available on the website of the President of India. But I'll not suggest that you read that debate. I mean the speech available on the website of the President of India. But I'll suggest you people to watch the YouTube video when she delivered a speech on the Constitution Day celebration in 2022, in November 2022. What she did is, before she could have finished her traditional way of delivering speech, because what they do is they come with the written speech and they read out when they deliver their speech. But before concluding her speech, she diverted from the traditional way of delivering speech. Then she started sharing her own experiences of being in charge of the jails in the state of Odisha when she was the MLA, as well as her experiences of governor of Jharkhand. And if you watch the YouTube video, because whatever the points that she focused during that speech, then that has not been reflected in the uploaded speech. Because whatever the original speech was written, that is the reflection on the presidential website. So we don't get any indication what was the speech and so on and so forth. But that video is still available on YouTube, where she pointed out that because on the day of Constitution Day celebration, that was full of the judges and so on and so forth, she urged the judges to address the issues and concerns of tribal communities. And she shared that, when she was the governor of Jharkhand, then she urged the Chief Justice of the High Court of Jharkhand to categorize the cases into different groups and dispose at a time. And as a result, one day, the legislative processes of Jharkhand disposed 5,000 cases that was filed against the tribal communities, and it also entered in the Limca book of record of disposing highest number of cases in a day. And it was pointed out that the similar kind of thing can also be reflected at the national level. And as a result of our speech on the Constitution Day celebration in 2022, which is, unconventional way of delivering, which is available only on website, then the Chief Justice of India took note of that and formed two members, constitutional bench to ask all the jail authorities to give the details of how many, marginalized communities or people from marginalized communities are languished in jail, what kind of crime they have done, what is their plan for disposing, and so on and so forth within 15 days. So what the point that I'm making over here is that she may be there as a symbol or in symbolic nature, but her presence has essentially put some kind of impact on the tribal communities in the way of sensitizing the authorities who have been dealing with tribal issues. And if some of you are interested in addressing tribal issues, I'll certainly suggest that in addition to this YouTube video, please do read the speeches she has delivered while meeting different authorities. Like if she has a meeting with the Indian Administrative Service people, then she will deliver that she will raise the issues of sensitizing the tribal communities as well as working towards the betterment in scheduled areas. If she meets the IFS, Indian Forest Service people, then she will focus on, she has focused, I have gone through the speeches. That's what I'm drawing this conclusion from there, that she has also focused that the tribal communities should be sensitized, should be conscious, should be made conscious about their, forest rights. So what I'm trying to suggest over here is that whenever she is meeting some of the authorities who are essentially or who are directly or indirectly dealing with tribal issues, then she is bringing those issues. So in that way, if we see the, no doubt in the larger context, we may argue that her presence is more symbolic, but even if so, then she has been able to sensitize the authorities dealing with tribal issues. But on the other hand, I know there are also other concerns. I'll take 30 more seconds then before I finish. On the other hand, then there's also larger concern that even if she has become the president of India, even from the tribal communities, her presence has not made much difference. And people do repeatedly cite the case of Manipur, where she did not even utter a single word, because this is primarily because the president of India, again, I'm coming back to the parliamentary democracy as well as the larger concerns of democratic dominance, that she is not allowed to speak independently, in a sense that the president of India act in aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So for that reason, there are no doubt she has occupied the highest constitutional position, but at the same time, there are some kind of contradictions within Indian constitution, which does not or which do not allow the president to act independently. So I think with these words, I'll stop here. And if there is any query, questions, then I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Jagannath, for that very rich and I would say provocative lecture, because I think it has really stimulated all of us to think about this issue from multiple lens, from a historical lens, from a comparative lens, and there are other issues that you brought here. So now I open up the floor to questions, and if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. I think someone can pass around the mic. Please introduce yourself and you can ask your questions. Thanks.
Thank you. This is Smriti Ranjan from the Center for Gandhian Thought and Peace Studies, CUG, Gandhinagar. Professor Ambagudia, do we really need to look at the scheduled tribe representatives as only representing the scheduled tribes? Because, if you look at different theories of representation, like if you look at, Edmund Burke, the trustee model of representation, he argues that, once you enter the legislature, you also, you represent the entire nation, and you also represent your own self, where, you use your reason to, to contribute to nation building, rather than the, the narrow or the parochial interest that you are supposed to supposed to represent. So, I mean, I'm not saying that when people from scheduled tribe, or for any other reserve category background, they enter legislature. So it is I mean, we expect that they will represent their own community, but at the same time they also represent the nation. So what is your take on that?
We can take some more questions and then we can proceed.
Yeah, I'm Shudip Basu, teach at the Central University of Gujarat. One point which was in a way revealing is the point about tribal mobilization and social solidarity among tribals across regions and across different boundaries. You have noted that somewhere, this solidarity is, solidarities are never formed, nor are alliances formed, because they are because tribal interests are so very fixed in some senses. But do you think that with the information technologies and the way information technology has affected politics, and the access to technology among tribals is, as far as it goes, as good as any other community, particularly in some regions, definitely. But yet we find somewhere that this solidarity is missing. And I think there's some missing links there. I mean, is solidarity something that they choose not to have? Or is the lack of solidarity a result of a certain kind of political compulsion? I think something, if you can clarify what exactly is leading to this kind of a situation.
I'm sorry, I just forgot to appreciate. I mean, this is one of the best talks on tribal issues so far. So
So good evening, sir. My name is Arjun, and I am a PhD student at Central University of Gujarat. So my question is about the debate that often crops up when it comes to the reservation, that is, of putting a creamy layer cap. Because within ST or even SC groups, there are many people, many families which might be very well off, and due to which often the deserving candidates don't get the chance of reservation, and the reservations is cornered by only one elite class within that particular community, and it often lead to some sort of embarrassment for many students who have to explain every time, okay, we are here because of merit, we are not here because of reservation necessarily, or why do we deserve to be here? So how do you explain this debate, just like as OBCs? Should there be a genuine creamy layer cap? Because within the STs, there is a difference in states wise as well. The STs in certain parts of the Rajasthan are very well off, and in that may not be, and when they are compared to the STs in the maybe Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, so they cannot be put in the same basket, even from the socio-economic point of view. So how do you see that issue?
Okay. Any more questions at this point? Yeah, Preet.
Hello, sir. My name is Preet. I'm a first year Master's of Society and Culture student here. I wanted to know, what kind of a dynamic space or is a tribal leader is when he or she is a part of a state party working for the tribal issues, and when a part of the national party working for tribes, but within a national framework where the principles of ideologies of the national party and um, framework within the
Can you
principles.
please repeat the first part of this thing?
I wanted to know that, what kind of a dynamic space is a tribal leader in when a part of a state party working for the tribal issues, and when part of a national party where he or she is working for the tribes, but within the national framework and under the principles of the ideologies of dominant communities.
So you're asking the difference between regional and
Yeah,
national
exactly. Yeah,
within the framework of.
within the framework of national ideologies. Yeah.
I think you can take these 4 questions and we can take.
Okay. For this question, probably At the beginning, I had pointed out that I may not be able to answer all these questions because I have my own perspective of dealing with this issue. First, coming to Smriti's question about the issue, then I think when it comes to tribal politics, then what I believe is we should begin with the idea and philosophy of political reservation. This is probably one of the reasons why, if you see the the Roundtable Conference in 1930s, then Ambedkar has suggested that instead of joint electorate, then we should go with separate electorate. In a sense, that the issue that you're raising is valid, because if you see the nature of the composition of constituency, then none of the constituency is exclusively consisting the tribal communities. And let me share my own field experience as well, that when I was talking to one of the tribal MPs, then he used interesting concept called conspiracy of constitution. I mean, conspiracy of constituency. In a sense that when the constituency was demarcated, then it was deliberately made that the tribal dominated areas are distributed between two constituencies. Even if that is the case, then my position is slightly different in a sense that they have been elected or represented for a particular purpose. Why I'm saying this one is that whenever someone is going to the national decision-making bodies like Parliament, they should engage with the debates and discussions on the national issues as well. But my limited point that I was making over here is that I have closely read the parliamentary debate on PESA, as well as Forest Rights Act or Forest Rights Bill, in fact, during that time. So as other tribal issues. So if you see the participants in the debates and discussions, nowhere or there is very limited participation of the tribal political representatives. So if that is the case, then how do you justify the continuation of political reservation? I'll be responding to that question again, which was asked, reservation as a whole. So the point that I'm making over here is that Parliament does not debate or Assembly does not debate tribal issues every day. Whenever there's a debate on tribal issues, tribal challenges, tribal issues, or for instance, debates over developmental projects, and Professor Virginis Khaka used interesting word called the legitimization of domination, then the major political parties or the non-tribal political representatives, they hardly give any attention to the tribal issues. But when it comes to debate, participation and other things, then these are the non-tribal political representatives who will get maximum number of time. And I'm sure you are from the student, discipline of political science, that when it comes to time allocation, then the time is being allocated once the Business Advisory Committee decides the amount of time to be allocated for each issue to be debated in the decision-making bodies. Then the Speaker of Legislative Assembly or Lok Sabha or Chairman of Rajya Sabha, allocate time not to the individual MPs, whether tribal MPs or otherwise, but to the political parties. So if, for instance, 120 minutes are decided to focus on a particular issue, then 120 minutes will be divided among 543 or 545, whatever the strength will be, and the party strength will decide how much time a particular political party is going to get. But my concern here is when it comes to who should speak, because they also need to give the list of the speaker to the Speaker of the House, that it is the non-tribal MPs, they appear first. They have been given due importance, even if it is the case of tribal issues. So if that is the case, then what I consider there is a crisis of representation, tribal representation. Then probably you may be wondering, what is the alternative to that, right? I have been through my different writings, I have been trying to push that unless we have larger systemic reform, then we will not be realizing the objective of this group representation in India. So unless we do that, and I'm sure that you may be familiar with the term called constitutional democracy, right? Aaron Leifert's concept of democracy, that can appear as one of the significant alternatives to address this one. So one, the tribal representatives are also being elected from a particular reserve constituency, which also consists of the people or the voters from non-reserve or non-tribal, SC. Then they also need to address their issues because they need to come back to the power in the next election. So the point that I'm making over here is that it may not be feasible for any MP from reserve constituency to exclusively address the interest of that particular community because of the composition of the constituency. But whenever there's an issue related to their community, they should act more proactively, which is not happening at this point of time. They have been acting along the line of their political affiliation, not on the basis of that aspect. As far as Sudeep's question is concerned, then, if we look at the relationship between, I'll come to the solidarity approach later. If you look at the impact of ICT, information communication technology, then that also has much to do with the literacy rate, their familiarity with the use of technology, as well as their access to, these kind of facilities. And I'm sure that different reports have been flagged off during the COVID period, where the classes went online, right? And that exposed the, partial approach of the Indian state, where the ICT is still to enter in the rural areas where you find the high concentration of tribal population. In terms of using ICT for, mobilization, election campaigning, and so on and so forth, unless they do have, access to those kind of facilities, I don't think that will have much impact over there. That's why if you see the number of rallies that happens during elections, then political parties or political leaders do go to tribal areas for offline kind of rally rather than campaigning through social media, Facebook, Instagram, and so on and so forth, because that also requires access to those kind of facilities. In terms of solidarity and other thing, then that's interesting that the solidarity approach is missing as far as the tribal communities are concerned. But at the same time, one way of understanding that issue is tribal communities are also not homogeneous. So as tribal issues, so as tribal challenges, so as the problems of tribal communities. So their orientation towards those issues are also largely driven by their own heterogeneous character. There should have been pan-Indian tribal identity, which is missing at this point of time, that those who have been, working towards tribal issues and so on and so forth, they have been advocating for that issue for quite some time, but which is unlikely to develop in the recent, past. In relation to your, question about addressing issues at the national level as well as state level, there are different ways of looking at these issues. That is, that the political parties which have formed government at the center level, they will probably have different kind of approaches than the other political parties formed at the state level, if I'm getting your question correctly. In a sense, that they do look at the issues at the national level, and they do frame laws, regulation, acts, considering the larger concern of the, country. I'll give you one example. That the Forest Rights Act was formulated during the Congress government, right? And if you see at the state level, then it is not the Congress government, especially I'm drawing your attention to the state of Odisha that I belong to. That if you take the advantage of the Forest Rights Act, it is the regional political party of Odisha, BJD, Biju Janata Dal, that takes the maximum advantage of implementing the Forest Rights Act, because Odisha stands out to be the top position in implementing Forest Rights Act at the, in India. So that kind of aspects are essentially providing extra advantage to the regional political parties or state political parties, because the voters do consider whoever is forming the law that is least concern for them, because at the end of the day, they are largely looking what kind of benefit that they are going to get, or what kind of benefit that they're getting, and who is or which political party is facilitating to deliver that kind of facilities. So I feel I feel in that way. And in addition to that, regional political parties do have some narrow concern that they do, or state political parties do have some narrow concerns, in a sense that they do raise much state issues rather than national issues. But at the national level, they do try to address the regional issues as well, but to a minimum, to at the margin, at the lowest level. Probably, I think that may be the one way of understanding this issue. I'm not sure whether I can satisfy your query. About the creamy layer, that has been the debates for quite some time now. The debate has been emerging or re-emerging because of this 27% reservation for OBCs, who essentially constitute around 49% or little less than half of the India's population, right? And people do argue that if the similar kind of criminal layer principles can be applied to OBC, then why can't it be applied to SCs as well as STs, in a sense that, for instance, if you take the example of ST communities, then you do find highest presence of Mina tribal communities in government employment than other tribal communities. So in that context, it is obvious that there should be some kind of creamy layer principle that should be applied to the tribal communities. But I have a different position to take in this context. Why are we taking one particular community and generalizing the entire country? Look at the overall representation of tribal communities, especially politics. So far, if you make a comparative analysis, of which I have tried to address in my different writings, if you make a comparative analysis of representation of tribal communities, politics is the only sphere where you find 100% representation of tribal communities, because the reserve constituency cannot go unattended, and that will be contested by the reserve category candidates only. And we do follow the electoral system. It's called the past the post system. Irrespective of minimum threshold doesn't matter here. Whoever gets the highest vote, they will be elected. So in that sense, politics is the only sphere where you do find 100% representation. Then see the other aspects, like reservation in government employment or their representation in educational institution. They come with certain kind of requirements, certain kind of qualification. And no doubt we may have defined the formal qualification, but the implementation aspect is left to the selection committee, right? And they decide who is meritorious, who is mediocre, who is non-mediocre. So far, I have been closely following the representation of tribal, of marginalized communities. I think University of Hyderabad is the only university I have found where they had declared, the professorial position, which was for unreserved category, is not found suitable candidate. Not found suitable candidate is also not at the interview level. That is at the screening level, because there are certain criteria that you need to have 10 publications in peer-reviewed journals in order to go to the next step. So the point that I'm making, the limited point that I'm going to make is that when it comes to merit, then the marginalized communities like the SCs and STs are the worst victim of such practices. And do remember that merit is not absolute. It is static. It has been decided at two different levels. One is minimum eligibility, that is MA, position of MA, or whatever the paper, approved on paper. But the other level they decide is at the interview level, where you do find, I'm sure that if you look at the appointment process of different universities, then you will find that there may be post reserved for SC, ST, but when the result comes out, NFS, not found suitable, right? So the point that I'm making over here is that if you continue to have that kind of experiences, then at some point of time, you're going to rule out the possibility of at least some representation from marginalized communities in government employment, even in education. And there was also, recently the Ministry of Education has to come out with some kind of explanation, clarification that UGC has provided the revised guidelines for reservation policy, right? And after 3 advertisements, if they don't find the suitable candidate from reserve categories, then there was a provision for de-reserving. This was also there earlier. Then there was some kind of amendments taking place, amendments that were carried out that the seats shall not be de-reserved. So that created a lot of havoc across the country when the UGC circulated the revised guidelines for reservation policy. Then the Ministry of Education has to come out and give the explanation, clarification, issue the clarification through tweets that none of the seat for reserve categories is going to be, de-reserved. They will continue to be, reserved for uncertain period. That means till they get the suitable candidates. And unsuitability is decided by the selection committee. Please do remember. And at the same time, there may be some kind of observer from the reserve categories, but they are just like the people who can say yes to yes, no to no kind of people. So people who are more vocal, who do fight for the the selection of the marginalized communities will certainly be sidelined by even by the university authorities. So the point that I'm making over here is, unless you have 100% representation, just like politics, this seems to be quite redundant for me. That this Ministry of Personnel and so on and so forth, that comes up with annual report. I'll suggest you look at the statistics. You don't find the representation, you do find the underrepresentation of SC, ST in category A and B services. But you do find overrepresentation in category D. Why that is so? Because they believe that skill is not the cup of tea of the marginalized communities. When they are being underrepresented in category A and B, that means they are not recognizing the quality of the marginalized communities. They are, they are deciding who should be suitable, who should not be suitable, even if they possess the minimum eligibility criteria. If you are possessing minimum eligibility criteria, then you are quite capable enough to take up that job. But when you go to appear the selection committee, they will reject you based on the fact that you are unsuitable. And please do remember that in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm correct about the year, then this was also raised in the Supreme Court as well, when the case was discussed in relation to the criminal layer issues of OBC. The Supreme Court also remained silent on this issue. When the issue of criminal layer came out in relation to scheduled tribes and scheduled castes, the Supreme Court also did not say any specificity over here. It also remained silent. What does that indicate? That indicates that when it comes to the commanding jobs or the class 1, class 2 jobs, they continue to be underrepresented in those kind of jobs unless they have adequate representation in those kind of jobs. Then it may be futile to argue for introducing criminal layer as far as the marginalized reserve categories are concerned. That's my position on this. Thank you.
So in interest of time, if there are any final questions, yes, Nishant has one. There's some questions on the chat box, so I'll just summarize them. One is asking about the rightward shift of the tribal vote towards the right-wing political parties. And I think, yeah, and that can be your first question. And then the last from Nishant.
Hello. Hi. Hi, I'm Nishant. I'm faculty here. So one of the interesting points, it was up there, but maybe because of lack of time, you didn't really talk about it much, were the demand for autonomy. And that's also something I've worked in various parts of the country among different tribal groups. Like autonomy seems to be, the demands for autonomy seems to characterize a significant aspect of tribal politics. If you even talk about Jharkhand movement or the various other kinds of parties, even the Bharatiya tribal party, I mean, it seems like things are a lot of times framed in terms of autonomy. Now, if you have a section of tribal politics and about autonomy, and then seems to be, so can that really be encompassed by the representation? Meaning, could that also be one aspect of the disconnect? Because tribal politics is characterized by autonomy, but in the representation of the institutions, autonomy cannot really be articulated because the political discourse may not allow it, or not just national political parties, but the general structure of the political discourse within an institution like parliament or something may not allow. So do you see some kind of disconnect that's there because of the politics of autonomy, or how does how can the politics of autonomy be articulated in parliament in a certain way that doesn't, yeah, I mean, just how can it be articulated, or is just become two separate spheres, and that might be the reason for part of the disconnect?
Thank you. I think two significant questions are there. One is of course, this shifting of social base from one party to the other one with what they're considering as towards right-wing political party, right? The BJP. I think there's a need to look at critically of these issues because when it comes to tribal communities, then some of the political parties are trying to appropriate their leaders, their icons. And as tribal communities are largely concerned with their culture, traditions, and so on and so forth, I feel that they're raising that kind of issues to appropriate the tribal voters. But we also need to look at from the other side of the story in the sense that on the one hand, you're appropriating their legends, their leaders, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, you are also marginalizing them further by alienating them from resources and so on and so forth. I think partially this is also one way of responding to your questions as well, autonomy and all those things. I'll come to that in a minute. I think one way of addressing this issue is that as tribal communities are also distributed across party lines, as they also do not find any reliable alternative sources or alternative forces, probably that's one of the ways of understanding why there's this shift from one political party to the other. In relation to the kind of articulation of autonomy and so on and so forth, then probably one way of addressing the issues of autonomy is what do they actually mean by autonomy as far as the tribal communities are concerned. Autonomy is being misunderstood, misinterpreted over the time. In 1980s, when there was a representation of tribal communities from different parts of the country to the Indigenous People Day celebration in Geneva, United Nations Working Group on Indigenous Population, then some of the tribal groups from Northeast India, especially the Naga tribes, they had also, misinterpreted the term called autonomy, in a sense that autonomy means something like moving away from Indian Union. And the chairperson of that session, Working Group on Indigenous Population, clearly pointed out that autonomy nowhere means, fragmenting the Indian state or not Indian state, but I mean the nation state further. Autonomy here is that they should have their rights. They should have the rights over their resources. Autonomy here is something like the provisions of Forest Rights Act, the provisions of PESA, where they can establish control over their resources, the way they need to be governed. I feel at this point of time in that way. No doubt that if we really want to bring some kind of changes at the national level, then that requires a lot of efforts, which becomes extremely challenging at this point of time, the way that I was responding to other questions, that because of sectarian interest involved even among the tribal communities. And this autonomy is also being misinterpreted by some of the tribal political leaders as well when it comes to serve their personal interest of being in power. I look at it in that way. I'm not sure whether I have given the answer to your question, but I'll certainly relook at the issues in terms of autonomy, then disconnect kind of thing over here.
I think with that, we can come to the end of this lecture. And I thank each and every one of you for your questions, for your thoughts. And as we are ending, I think we'll end it on the ritual that we have. So I request, I think, first of all, I think we can give him a huge round of applause for his very, very, I would say, a breathtaking scope of issues that he has presented to us, and that I think, which I think that has forced us to really think about these issues from a very different lens. So thank you for that. And I request all of you to sort of please come forward as we take a group photograph and we can depart for the day. So thank you.